In the early 1980s, I began my corporate career. It may never have materialized, except there was a growing push to hire women. My company thought there was going to be affirmative action quotas. They wanted to get ahead of the curve, and I got the job. Now, I quickly became an integral part of the company, and that allowed me to make jokes that I was only there because they had to hire a woman. But deep down, I knew, and my male colleagues did as well, that my diverse approach brought real value. And that ignited in me a lifelong passion for the value of opposites, particularly those opposites that we would consider to be masculine and feminine qualities. But recently, I have watched I wrote a book and have given many talks on how important it is to allow these two polar opposites to emerge and grow together. Because that's when we unlock and they become the most creative solutions. But recently, I have watched with dismay as men and women seem to be increasing hostilities between them. Instead of growing as complements, I fear that we're teetering on the brink of a gender war. Young men hold signs that say, "Your body, my choice." Young women retaliate with the four-pronged approach of no dates, no sex, no weddings, no kids. This is all made worse by social media. We're spending our time in online, isolated echo chambers. There was a time when we used to hang out in somebody's basement or the local diner in gender diverse groups. And now we're online in segregated echo chambers. In the manosphere, the prevailing belief is that masculinity is under threat by feminism, and might makes right. In the femisphere, the prevailing belief is that men will always hurt women, and they try to make themselves bigger by making women smaller. And then strong men leaders will prey on these tensions and tell people, it's a frightening world out there, and all of your problems can be blamed on those who defy traditional gender roles. So we've gone from a place where we had discrimination that resulted in stereotypes that could be handled by affirmative action programs, and where I used humor in the workplace. I remember being in meetings, and afterwards the guys would all stand up and leave their coffee cups. Like, what's that about? And I'd say, don't worry, boys, I'm a woman. I have a biological need to clean up. And with that, they'd have a chuckle, pick up their cups, we'd all live to see another day and have another meeting. But I'm not laughing anymore, because what I'm seeing is that competition has overshadowed collaboration. It has morphed into aggression. Men and women are like toddlers fighting over the last cookie. But here's the thing. We can make more cookies. What it takes is a commitment to balance and the recognition that men and women, the masculine and feminine, both have equal things to contribute, and they both need to be given the space to do so. Now, for many years, I was a single female executive in a male-dominated environment. And I remember once our CFO saying to me, Betty Ann, how women have the X chromosome and men have the XY? Well, the bottom half of your last X has fallen off. It's looking an awful lot like a Y. What he was really saying to me is, you are acting the way I would expect a man to act right now in your position and under these circumstances. And when I look back on that, I missed the ideal time to ask for a raise. Now, my CFO's remark was made in jest, but it did highlight a fundamental truth about our society, and that is that we have pretty definite ideas about the way that we think men should act and the way that we think women should act. And when it all boils down to it, we expect men to take charge and women to take care. Now, neither one of these sets of attributes is better than the other, but they are better when they are working together, because that's when we get the most creative solutions. It's when we can move forward with purposeful action rather than shooting first and asking questions later. But in order for us to have them work as complements, we need to learn balance. And that is no different than learning to ride a bike. When you learn to ride a bike, you have to build up some momentum. So you step first with one pedal, and then you go to the opposite pedal, and then you go back to the original pedal. And then you go back and forth in a continuous motion until you build up speed. If you forget or don't step on the other side and just go to one side, you're going to tip over and fall. It's exactly the same with masculine and feminine. You either can start with take charge or take care. But you go take charge, take care, take charge, take care, back and forth between them, going back and forth until you build up speed. And then you realize you've made remarkable progress. So it's exactly the same with masculine and feminine. We need to be able to use them both. I gave this example one night when I was giving a talk in Northern Ontario. And following my remarks, a big, burly shift boss from a hard rock mining company approached me to ask how he could develop greater empathy. You see, he recognized that empathy would be a really good complement to his very directive leadership style. So you see, for a while, I really felt like I was helping to create a better environment for women and men to work together, and that would be good for humanity. But recently, I have felt a lot of dismay and disillusionment and despair. I've watched as strong men leaders present the world as a zero-sum game where you either dominate or you submit. And that creates a warrior culture where the voices of women are silenced and the contribution of the feminine is denigrated. It caused me a lot of heartache. I can tell you that I wake at night with a heaviness in my chest, the kind that makes your breath feel too shallow and your thoughts too loud. But I will say that the prospect of giving this talk has reignited me. It's been like emotional caffeine. So let's just talk for a minute about those poles. And because most people think that they come from our biology. And while it is true that men grow taller than most women, and they develop bigger muscles, but not always, and they sweat more. The one thing I know for sure is that somehow every man seems to think that the thermostat should be set on Arctic tundra. Now, women, by and large, will grow larger breasts, have smaller Adam's apples, and greater peripheral vision, which could be why I can spot a jewelry store out of the corner of my eye from at least 100 yards. But it's time to bring our biology in line with our beliefs in line with our biology. There was a study that came out of the University of Tel Aviv in 2015. They put 419 people through an MRI and they analyzed their brains. And what they found is that those brains, that it would be at the further ends of each spectrum, guess what? Fewer than 1%. The other 99% of us, our brains are made up of a myriad of characteristics from all over that spectrum. There's nothing about our brains that denominate them as being masculine or feminine. It's just like our fingerprints or the retinas of our eyes. Our brains are totally our own. They are totally unique. They're totally individual, and they're genderless. And yet we get so many messages that say that men should act one way and women should act another. It starts when we're born. The research shows that when parents hold a baby girl, they'll say, "Isn't she cuddly?" And when they hold a baby boy, they'll say, "Look how active he is." And yet outside observers notice no difference whatsoever in the behavior of those babies. And then those babies get a little older and they start watching media. It could be a show that's very popular right now, Paw Patrol. Well, in Paw Patrol, the majority of the rescue dogs are male, and they do the action-oriented jobs of being police officers and firefighters. The female rescue dogs? Well, they're fewer in number, they wear pink, and for the most part, they do less demanding jobs. And then those kids get older, they go to school, maybe to church. I'm sure they look for a peer group because we all want to belong and fit in. They may go to movies, watch TV, and probably spend a lot of time on the internet. And they get all these messages that men should be one way and women another. So it's not a surprise that most men present themselves as with the attributes of take charge, and most women present themselves with the attributes of take care. And it doesn't really matter because sometimes we'll get take care from the men and sometimes we'll get take charge from the women. But what matters is that we have them both because we need them both. That's how we have that complement for them, so for us all to get the most creative solutions. Now, I learned these lessons just through my own work experience, but I have since found research to reinforce it. There's a well-known global psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and he did a study of people who were highly creative, who had found solutions to some of society's greater problems. And he interviewed innovators and inventors and scientists. And what he found is that they used the attributes of the masculine as well as the attributes of the feminine. They were highly creative because they took charge and they took care. Now, I want to warn you that having two polar opposites is never easy. It's very tempting to get rid of one and go with the other because that simplifies things. But that doesn't give us our most creative solutions. We need to hold two polar opposites and move them from a position of conflict to one of creative tension. It's just like guitar strings. If they're too tight, they break. And if they're too loose, they're useless. But if you can tighten them and then loosen them, and then tighten them and then loosen them to just the right tension, you will get music, beautiful music. So you see, each and every one of us have a role to play. Regardless whether we're male or female, we can help stop the slide to the gender wars. And the first thing we need to do is turn down the temperature. And I don't mean the thermostat. The second thing we need to do is recognize that regardless whether we are male or female, none of us want to be put into a gender box. We all want to be recognized for the individuals that we are. And that means that, if we feel like we have to live up to some artificial role that's been foisted upon us, we're going to feel judged and labeled and blamed. We need to have some pretty open and honest and good faith conversations where we not only tell our side of the story, but we listen intently to the other side of the story as well. We need to get out of our online echo chambers and meet each other in the real world where we can discover one another's humanity. And we need to ignore the hate-filled rhetoric of strong men leaders who stir up hate and fear and anger in order to control us. And overcoming that fear takes some courage. And that might be a good reason to get our bikes out of the garage and learn to ride. Now, I have to tell you that in working on this talk, I recognized that I needed to apply the lessons I've learned on the polarity of masculine and feminine to my own despair. You see, the polar opposite of despair is hope. And just like masculine and feminine are interconnected, despair and hope are interconnected. There's a South Korean philosopher, Chung Chu Han, and he says that despair is when we recognize the limitations of the present. And hope is when we see beyond the current limitations to the opportunities available. So hope uses despair as a springboard for transformation. I have a great deal of hope that the despair that I'm feeling now around the conflict between masculine and feminine, that there's an opportunity for us to see the way that we can work together more productively as complements in the future. Because of each and every one of us can transform our deep-seated fears into strength for life. We can break down the walls of misunderstanding between the genders. We can stop the slide to the gender wars. And we can all benefit from the most creative solutions. So let's join together and get on our bikes and ride forward together. Thank you.